to my channel. If you like the video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. In this video, I'm going to analyze the poem Kubla Khan by the Romantic poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Kubla Khan, written sometime in 1797, was first published by Coleridge in 1816. It was described by him as a vision in a dream, a fragment. As Coleridge himself says, the story goes that he was staying at a lonely farmhouse and had taken opium. He fell into a charmed sleep in which he had a vision or a dream. On waking, he began to write a poem on that dream. But before it could all be written out, a person on business interrupted the poet at his task, and when he returned to it, as it commonly happens with dreams, all was gone. An immediate inspiration was derived from the book Parcus's Pilgrimage, a book of voyages written by the 17th century travelogue writer Samuel Parcus, which Coleridge was reading just before he fell asleep. The book contained an account of Kubla Khan and his magnificent court at Xanadu. Kubla Khan was a Mongolian emperor, the grandson of the great Chengiz Khan, the founder of the Mongolian Empire. Kubla Khan ruled from 1257 to 1294. Xanadu was the summer capital of Kubla Khan. As a poem, Kubla Khan is based on Coleridge's concept of secondary imagination and is a perfect demonstration of the workings of that imagination. According to Coleridge, the secondary imagination is a creative faculty which consists in reconciling the opposites. The sacred river Elf, mentioned in the poem, is a secondary imagination which springs from the dark unconscious regions of the poet's mind. This secondary imagination, springing from the turmoils of the poet's unconscious, creates organic form of art out of the diverse materials. According to Coleridge, a poet is a prophet endowed with transcendent powers of revelation. Now let us refer to the poem and analyze the lines. Lines 1 to 5. In the first 5 opening lines, Coleridge describes the paradisal landscape of Xanadu. The splendid summer palace at Xanadu was built on the sacred river Elf, which would flow through deep caves and then disappear into a sunless sea. The name of the river Elf is an imaginary one and probably derived from Alpheus. The Alpheus is a river of Arcadia in Greece. The Elf is said to be a sacred river as it stands for fertility and creativity. It fertilizes the lands through which it flows. On a symbolic level, the river may suggest the flowing stream of divine poetic inspiration which enlightens the dark abyss of the poet's mind. Lines 6 to 11. In these lines, Coleridge describes the fertile tract of land extending over 10 square miles enclosed with wall and towers. Small streams would follow a winding course through the tract of land. It had also a number of trees laden with sweet, fragrant flowers. Its forests, as old as hills, enclosed a bright spot, overgrown with all kinds of green vegetation. It is a picture of fertility, growth, and vitality. The exotic landscape symbolizes the ideal heaven for perfect artistic creation, a land that ensures supreme fulfillment of artistic creativity. Lines 12 to 16. In these lines, the poet gives a description of the deep and broad opening or chasm in the midst of the paradisal landscape encompassing the pleasure dome of Kubla Khan. The river Elf has its source in the deep savage chasm, which constantly throws up rocks. The chasm stops down a green hill across a cover made by the cedar trees. The place is wild and sinister, and it inspires awe and mystery. It is at the same time holy and magical. It is a kind of place frequented by a woman who, after having been loved and then deserted by her demon lover, laments his absence and sets out in search of him under the waning moon. The lines have supernatural suggestions. The readers are transported to the enchanted atmosphere of the medieval period. On a symbolic level, the process of poetic creation, according to Coleridge, is an awe-inspiring and mysterious one. Poetry is a product of the union of the human and the supernatural. A poet feels the pain of failure if he is not inspired by that supernatural or divine power to create great poetry. Lines 17 to 24. In these lines, the poet describes the romantic chasm, which is the source of the sacred river Elf. It is a savage place. Ceaseless turmoil is bursting from it. A mighty fountain is forced from this chasm, throwing up huge rocks. The huge rocks are bursting out of it with the sounds of hails, falling on the plain and are again thrown up by their impact on the ground. Sometimes, by the impact, the rocks broke into little fragments and resembled the chaff of grains which came flying up from the threshing floor when bitten by the sticks of the threshers. The fountain coming up with the rocks turns out to be the sacred river Elf. The river is sacred because it is the very principle of fertility and creativity, but its origin is mysterious, magical, and savage. Lines 25 to 30. The sacred river Elf ran along in its zigzag course for miles through forest and valley. It then tumbled into a gorge of limitless depth and merged in the end with a great uproar into the calm stretch of the waters of the ocean. In the midst of all the rush and roar of waters, Kubla Khan heard the departed spirits of his ancestors warning him about the wars ahead. The mention of the spirits has supernatural suggestions. Symbolically, it may suggest the artist's mental disturbances and fear, apprehending the destruction of his creation. Lines 31 to 36. The image of Kubla's pleasure dome was reflected in the waves of the river Elf. The sound of the gushing waters of the fountain as it flowed through the caves produced a blended music. Coleridge speaks of the pleasure dome of Kubla Khan as an ideal piece of art. It presented a marvelous specimen of human skill. The palace was built in such a way that it had a bright sunny dome on its top, while below its floor were ice-cold caves. The bright sunny dome represents creation, while ice-cold caves stand for destruction. Thus, there is a blend of oppositions, of antinomies. This is the essence of ideal art. True art lies in the reconciliation of the opposites. Kubla's pleasure dome is a rare miracle. It is the ideal flawless creation that a true artist aspires for. The dome captures the totality of creation by accommodating both life and death within it and combining them into a harmonious whole. The dome is the archetype of heaven and hell, of life and death, of creation and destruction. It represents the whole panorama of human existence. Lines 37 to 41. In these lines, the poet describes a vision he once saw. He had the vision of an Abyssinian girl singing of the splendor of Mount Abora and playing on the dulcimer. She is singing of a paradisal landscape, very much like that of the opening lines. Here, the poet describes the act of poetic creation. He means to say that he would create idle poetry under the inspiration stirred up in him by the song of the Abyssinian maid. The Abyssinian maid is a muse who inspires the poet. She belongs to Abyssinia, which is modern Ethiopia. The reference takes us back to African countries of the ancient times. Symbolically, of course, the Abyssinian maid is a muse of poetic inspiration for the poet. Dulcimer is a kind of stringed musical instrument. Mount Abora is an imaginary name. It is probably inspired by Mount Amara, mentioned by John Milton in Paradise Lost, Book 4. Lines 42 to 47. In these lines, Coleridge describes the act of poetic creation. In his dream, he has heard the song of an Abyssinian maid singing of the paradisal landscape of Mount Abora. The song has enchanted and inspired him. He wishes to relive in his imagination her song. He says that if he could revive it in his heart, he would be so inspired that he would build Kubla Khan's dome in the air. He means to say that he would create such beautiful poetry as Kubla Khan's palace that it will charm his readers and they would be thrilled by the wonder of his poetic creation. Kubla Khan's palace is, for the poet, the rarest specimen of human skill because it reconciles the universal opposites. It represents the archetypal pattern of life and death, the whole panorama of existence. The poet could create such a beautiful picture in his poetry if he is divinely inspired. A poet can create ideal poetry in fine frenzy. Here, Coleridge expresses his belief in the theory of inspiration for the creation of ideal art. Great poetry is written under inspiration, and it is a vivid imaginary statement of the full panorama of existence. Lines 48 to 54. In the last few lines, Coleridge gives a picture of an inspired poet. A poet can create beautiful works of art under the influence of divine inspiration. He can write vivid and enchanting poetry only in fine frenzy. According to Coleridge, a poet caught in spell of poetic inspirations becomes almost a supernatural being. He becomes a figure of power, mystery, and enchantment. His listeners become full of awe for his magical powers. The poet's eyes flash, and his hair floats. He is in a mystical spell, as it were. Such a frenzied poet inspires holy fear in the minds of his listeners who treat him with wonder and awe. They will construct a magic circle around him and go round him thrice to mark him as an extraordinary person who is removed from the commonplace life by virtue of his magical creative power. Such a poet is divinely inspired, being fed on the heavenly honeydew and milk of paradise. Poetic inspiration, according to Coleridge, is indeed divine in nature. It is a gift of God, which makes a poet experience pure creative ecstasy and bliss when it descends on him.